So after you pick your object, and so I've picked this paper clip and it's transparent, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But after you pick your object, you're going to want to start drawing it and then deconstructing that Gestalt idea, just simplifying it to its most distinctive components in terms of the form. And you just don't want a lot of extraneous information, okay? And then the other thing is don't draw it like straight down like this. Try to draw it like at an angle so you can see the whole form itself. So I'm gonna start just laying out very simple line drawing of the form. And remember, because you're gonna simplify it so much, don't worry about the drawing aspect of it being so good, because you're going to be simplifying it so much. Okay, so I've drawn this plane and then this back plane here. Okay, and I drew an access line because there would be this whole piece, this whole shape is symmetrical, so it's just one, it's even on both sides, and it's basically the back side is basically just repeating the first plane, and this plane is just obviously back going into perspective. And there's also this little part here with this attachment for when you open it like this. Okay, so I'm going to draw this little part right here, and then also, if you notice, there's width right here, and there's width inside here, so this is the actual width of the plane. I'm just drawing the inside part where that thing is attached with that little piece of metal, or whatever it is, aluminum. And then obviously, this plane has that width right there. So I'm going to draw that width. So now I have drawn a line drawing, which is also referred to as a contour drawing of my paper clip, like this. It's the inside here. This plane is that plane is this plane. Okay, so basically I have the whole form, the structure down. And now what I want to do is I want to start refining it where I'm just trying to capture its essential formal aspects in terms of the shape and the contrast. So again, this is my width that I'm seeing right here and in here. So I have that here and here. So I'm trying to get rid of any extraneous information I don't need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Sharpie now, and I'm going to pull that out like that, and then I'm going to pull this black out like this. Like so. Okay, so what I've done is that this is that idea of continuance, where we know that this is going to continue around here. We know that this circle in here is within this plane. This is the center access line. Okay, so what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to be able to erase this whole edge, because I don't need that, because this whole side of this shape is informed by that Gestalt idea of continuance. So I'm going to just go like this, and this is going to be the bottom part, which is like right here. Okay, so then this continues to here. So this is basically, this is equal to this side. So we know that whatever's going to happen over here is going to continue around that side. So I have erased this whole side. And just remember that this whole first piece is about identifying the object and reducing it to its most essential form and shape, and getting rid of any extraneous information you don't need. So now you can see that idea of continuance. You know that this is following the shape over here. So you don't have to have that line. This is also grounding this top plane. So now I'm going to do the same thing with the back side, with the back plane in the back. Because remember, what I'm doing is I'm showing the width here, and I showed the width here, and then I showed the inside of that circle there. And now I'm going to do the back. I'm going to do this back plane. Okay, and remember, I don't have to have that line here because I know that this is continuing here, and that's going to be, it's basically, it's the same shape, it's the same plane. And so we know that it's going to continue without having to draw that line. One other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to darken this back plane because it's behind it. So now I'm doing right here, I'm doing the inside little piece of metal there, and then I'm going to do that plane there. So I'm just going to go up like this, and then I'm going to fill in that back plane, which will settle on there. So now I've reduced this to its essential form, getting rid of edges that I don't need because I know that they continue. So I'm eliminating anything in terms of pure reduction. And then what I did was I left, for that width right there, I just left a highlight right there. So all these black shapes are going to be basically the single shapes that you're going to cut out of your paper. Okay, but before we do that, what's going to happen now is once you have your object reduced, simplified to its essential form, then what you're going to do is the other three designs, the symmetry panel, the repetition and pattern panel, and the magnification abstract panel are going to come out of this piece that you've done now from your object. So you no longer have to look at the actual object. You're going to be deriving those other three pieces from the piece that you've done here. So now I've laid a piece of trace down over a piece that I did. I'll lay a piece of trace down, and now, just as an example about how to move on to get the elements or the components to make up the other three panels, I'm just going to try to, and you're going to be able to do whatever you want based on whatever you come up with, whatever you think is interesting. But for instance, I'm going to take this part right here, and I'm going to use that for my repetition and pattern. Okay, and then I'm going to take this part right here for my magnification abstraction, and then I'm going to take this part right here for my symmetry. Okay, so remember the other three panels, the symmetry, the repetition and pattern, and the magnification abstraction, you're taking directly out of your first simplified design from your object that you've reduced to its essential form. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to blow up the sections that I'm going to turn into those three other panels. So I've laid out on a piece of trace, 5 by 5 inch. This is going to be one of my panels. And now I'm going to work on my repetition and pattern panel. So I've gridded it off into 9 separate units, because to create a good repetition, you need to repeat it enough. And it's usually best to do it at least 9 times. You can do it a lot more times than that, but it's going to get more detailed. So remember, I chose to take this little section right here from my first one, which I am going to now repeat, and which is now going to form a pattern. So basically, this is going to be this unit right here, and I'm going to repeat it 9 times. And just like you were doing with your line studies, what you can do is you can draw on the back, and then you can just transfer it on to your trace here. And then, or after you've done that, and you can transfer the whole thing onto your Bristol board and then it'll be easier to cut out the paper from there. But I'm just going to show you what what it will look like repeated as a pattern. Okay, so for the section for my first piece, I took this right here that I wanted to use for my repetition and pattern. So you can see it there, it's isolated. And then I laid it out on my 5-inch panel. Remember, it's going to be in a 5-inch panel. And I repeated it at least 9 times, because in order to create a really interesting repetition, which becomes a pattern and which becomes interesting as a rhythm, you want to repeat it at least that many times. Depending on what your section is that you take from your original piece, you could maybe get away with 6, but it's really going to depend on what you do with each section. Also, sometimes with the repetition and pattern, if this seems like kind of boring, a lot of times students will basically just do it where they'll invert every other one, meaning that it's just reversed and inverted, and it almost becomes like a checkerboard. Okay, so that's basically, at that point, then I'm done with my figuring out my design for the repetition and pattern, and I can put that aside. And I can put that aside when I put it now aside with my first design. So I finished basically 2 panels so far. So now I'm going to move on to the magnification and abstraction. Okay, so for the magnification and abstraction one, I decided I was going to take this little section right up here. Okay, so when I draw that out, this becomes the unit that I'm going to magnify to the 5 by 5. Okay, and again, I'm doing all this on trace with my Sharpie, because then I can see everything in high contrast. So then this becomes, and again, I've magnified it from my little section I took from my original one, and because it's magnified even more, everything's gotten larger. Okay, so essentially what's happened here is it's now all the shapes have become really big, and it's become very abstract from my original design. So now I've finished my magnification and abstraction panel, and now I can move on to my symmetry panel. So now I'm going to work on my symmetry panel, which is basically like a mirror of the section or the design that I'm going to use. So remember, I was going to take this little section right here for my symmetry one, and now I've isolated it into this little unit, and now I'm going to blow it up to create my panel for symmetry. So when you do symmetry, just remember that you need an axis line right down the center that's completely, so both sides are completely equal. And you can either do this vertically, horizontally, or you can even do it diagonally. Okay, so now I'm going to work on the symmetry panel. So again, now I've done my symmetry design. So remember, I took this little section right here, okay, and then I isolated it as such on this little piece right here, and then I blew it up here, and so this is my access line, so I just mirrored it basically like this, and obviously I magnified it because it was blown up to 5 by 5. So basically, if you have an access line, again, either vertically or horizontally or diagonally, you just have to make sure that whatever design you take, it's just going to mirror itself, okay? And so again, if I wanted the final orientation to be like that, that would be fine. If I want to turn it this way, that's fine. You'll make that aesthetic choice when you've got all of the 5 panels together. So I started with my chosen object, which was this paper clip, okay? And then I did my first panel, which is going to, again, be 5 by 5 inches. I did it on trace. I drew it out, I drew the contour, the line drawing of it, and then with my Sharpie, I isolated all the conceptual ideas concerning Gestalt in terms of closure, continuity, reduction of form, and I basically reduced it to, in the most cohesive way and simplest way I can, and this is, remember, this is all about reduction, so we're just try to keep telling yourself that reduction is the key word here. In the most reduced way I could, I retained the form in the best possible way. And then from that, for my other 3 panels that I'm going to have to do, I started off with my repetition panel. So I took this little section right there, made this little thumbnail, excuse me. Then I turned it into this, okay? So I created a repetition, which creates a pattern and a nice rhythm. I also did another one. If I thought that one was a little too boring, where I inverted every other one, like a checkerboard. And then I took my next section right here, and I created my magnification panel, okay, which is right here. Okay, so you can see how amplified and kind of not distorted, but amplified and abstract it's become. And then for my last one, I took this little section right here, and I created this for my symmetry one. So basically I blew up this like so, and I created an axis line, so now it's mirroring itself. So now when I look at all four of them together, so now I've got everything done in my trace with Sharpies. I can see all the high contrast, and now I know that my next step after this is to create all of these from cut black paper, which I'm going to show you, which I'm going to show you in the next video. Okay, so just also remember in the final, when you're done with all of them and they're all completed on paper, you can start kind of like imagining that you can start changing the orientation or the direction of which way they go, if that's what you want to do. But just know that these three designs came directly out of your first one. And it's probably a good idea when you're working on this to confer with me about whether or not it's working. So once you get this one really resolved, then these three should be fairly easy, because you know that you really you really nailed this one really well. So inevitably any kind of designs that come out of it will probably end up working.